Now, another town this week joined the list of shame, where sex gangs have roamed seemingly unchecked to prey on girls as young as 11, raping, drugging, beating, trafficking, and potentially even murdering them in the process. What's happened in Telford could be the worst case of a paedophile gang involved in widespread child abuse the country has ever seen. But as I read the names of those convicted, something struck me. In Telford, they included Azir Ali Mahmoud, Mubarak Ali and Adel Ali. In a similar case in Rotherham, Razwan Razag, Adil Hussein and Zafran Ramzan were among the guilty. To Rochdale now, Mohammed Amin, Abdul Aziz and Mohammed Sajid, among others, were convicted. And now to Oxford, where it was Anjam Dogar, Kamir Jamil and Zishan Ahmed ending up behind bars. Now, a very broad reckoning of the guilty shows around 80% are men of Pakistani and Bangladeshi origin. Well, a couple of observations then. Why do they appear to view white girls as objects to be traded and even disposed of? And what is their community doing about it?
Nick, this is a tragedy that's been going on up and down the country, and unfortunately, the police and local councils have been complicit in covering up this scandal.
Well said.
Yeah.
Time and time again, they have found that British, Pakistani and Bangladeshi South Asian Muslim men like me have been involved in grooming underage white girls and targeting them in what I would describe as racially motivated sexual assault. And for fear of racism, the local politicians for fear of losing votes and the police for fear of being sacked by those local politicians have been hiding this situation. And of course, then it led to a national inquiry. We know that because the conclusions of the national inquiry were the same. I'm going to read to you something, because Telford could well be worse than what happened in Rotherham and Rochdale. And yet still, despite that, we have the superintendent for Telford and Wrecking, Tom Harding, saying the following. He said that what I would say is sexual offending across Telford and Wrecking is virtually identically proportionate to the breakdown of society, so it's not one particular section over others. Forgive the language, the French, but this is total BS, because he's confusing two types of sexual offences. And we as Quilliam looked into this, and I'm going to come to the stats in a second.
I know you've done a lot of, and you've done a lot of broadcasting. You're a real pillar in this area, I have to say. Salute what you've done.
Thank you. Type 1 is the grooming of underage white girls, or any girl generally is Type 1 as a category, the grooming of underage girls by gangs of men. Now, in Type 1, where the grooming gangs are involved, it was found in our research that we found, I'm going to put this up on the screen for you, that 84% of those involved in Type 1, which is gang grooming of underage girls, were, what it says there, South Asian. To be specific, they were Pakistani and Bangladeshi Muslims, right? Type 2, which is, I hate to use the phrase, ordinary paedophilia, what we normally understand by the word paedophilia, is representative of wider society. So one statistic found it was about 87% in Type 2, which was paedophiles, 87% were white. Another found 100% were white. But of course, that's not surprising because the vast majority of the country is white. What's interesting is the disproportionate figure of 84% hailing from my background. Why that's interesting is because roughly only 2% of the country are Pakistani and Bangladeshi Muslim men who are responsible for 84% of collective grooming of underage white girls.
You'll respect that. I must get other people involved. A fantastic body of work. Carol, I saw you nodding as I was going through the list.
You know what particularly sickens me on this is that, you know, in all of these places that you've mentioned, the police, the social workers, the care workers all knew what was going on. They couldn't pretend that they didn't. This has been going on since the 90s. And yet they chose, because of what you're talking about, Majid, because the biggest crime is to be accused of discrimination against ethnic minorities, they chose to throw these young girls to the wolves. And I want to show you, a bit of film here from the MP of Telford.
What has happened in the past is it's not been clear both to local authority or to the police that what is being reported is a crime. And I think procedures have improved, I think practices are now different, but there are still young people coming forward who feel that their voices are not being heard.
You see, that to me is absolute nonsense, because these girls have gone and made their voices heard for decades and no one was listening. That is a really disingenuous comment, because these girls had no way. It's not just a case of somebody grooming someone online. Some of these girls, as young as 11, were dragged into filthy, dirty houses and gang raped by men. They were perfectly aware that was a crime.
And compare and contrast with another Labour MP in Rochdale or Rotherham who made the point and was promptly sacked from the front bench for talking in the sort of terms that Majid has. We must get others involved.
But just let's say over Telford, 2 of the whistleblowers who tried to protect these girls were fired.
All right.
So Lucy Allen, the MP we just heard from, she has called for a public inquiry, and it seems that there will now be one. And it's important to say she has been calling for an inquiry since 2016. So
but there has been one.
Before we were all talking about this, she was talking about the true scale of the abuse in Telford.
But there's been
let's just hear from Afua. Yeah, on you go.
So I think anybody with any decency is absolutely appalled and horrified by these, and anybody who cares about children being safe has to speak out about this and say something is going wrong where we see these patterns replicated up and down the country. And I agree with everything that Majid has said. I think my concern in the way we talk about this, and I've done a lot of work on this as a reporter, as a social affairs editor before, is that there are 2 narratives that are both equally dangerous, right? We hear that the reason that the police and councils failed these vulnerable girls is because they were afraid of being accused of racism. Whether that's true or not, that is no excuse. There is no excuse for public servants not doing their basic job of protecting vulnerable children. The other narrative I've now heard from people who work in child protection is that police and local authorities now have this idea in their head that people who abuse children are Asian men of Muslim backgrounds, and that is obscuring the reality of other children who are being abused. Now, that's equally dangerous, because if you care about children being safe, you want all children to be safe. You don't want prejudice in local authority and police keep putting children at unnecessary risk. The thing I would say about Majid, your figures, which I remember at the time, and it was really important work. When we talk about this being an Asian problem, a Muslim problem. 100%, according to the NCA, of paedophiles, so not people who exploit vulnerability, but people who are just sexually attracted to children, are white.
That's type 2.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't talk about that as a white problem. And we also don't say that the white community needs to work out what is going wrong here and why there is paedophilia in its ranks, which there clearly is.
No. I don't think we are talking about type 2 paedophilia, which is white men who are attracted to children. What we are talking about is Asian grooming.
I understand that, but I am raising type 2.
We need very briefly to say this is a class problem, this is a cultural problem, and this is also a language problem.
Religion as well, by the way.
Also religion, because firstly on language, these are paedophiles who are raping children. OK, let's just accept that. And these are not women, these are not girls in relationships with their abusers.
And
this
some
is
of
rape.
The language around child prostitution
they
is
mustn't
very damaging, because there's no such thing as child prostitution.
They mustn't call the girl victims prostitutes. They are rape victims of rape. They are
and they were dismissed in this case.
Culturally, we have to understand why this goes on in this country. But finally, we haven't talked about class, and the reason why the authorities turned a blind eye and threw these girls under a bus or to the wolves was because they were, as it were, in an underclass. They thought these girls are out of education, they've been failed by social services. Honestly, if these were middle-class girls at boarding school, do you honestly think these children would not have been taken proper care of by the boarding school, by the authorities?
What I find astonishing is that even after all of Rotherham, Rochdale, Oxford, no prosecutions, no one
there have been prosecutions. There have been prosecutions.
How many?
There have been dozens of prosecutions, but not enough. Can we hear why this happens? Why
yes, let's go. And also, Majid, why, and if just come to the final point of my introduction, decent Muslims like yourself, you're being tarred by the brush, even worse than anyone else. What is to be done, Majid?
Oh, because it's men like me that get stereotyped as being rapists, and that's happening across Europe. But unfortunately, it's happening because across Europe, not just in Britain, there's a disproportionate rate of offending by either Muslim migrants or Muslims born and raised in Europe against white girls. And there are class reasons to it. There are patriarchal reasons to it. Why it happens in Muslim-majority nations is largely due to the social conservative attitudes in society and their patriarchal and misogynist attitudes towards women, and also cultural elements kick in. Now, for example, fundamentalist interpretations of Islam believe that as long as you have consent of the father, there's no underage, there's no pre-puberty, there's no limit on marrying a girl. They refer to the Prophet having married a 9 or 11-year-old, depending on the age of reference.
Right.
These attitudes must be challenged, and they must be addressed. Finally, to Afwa's point, yes, either 87% or 100% of paedophiles in type 2 which is those who prey on young, vulnerable children, are white, either 87% or 100%. But that's reflective of society, so it's a problem.
100% of society isn't white, Majid.
Yeah, but that's why I'm saying it's between that number, because we have two conflicting figures. The problem needs to be addressed, but what it certainly isn't is 2% of the society committing 84% of the crime. That has to be addressed as a category on its own. Now, the police haven't been doing enough, nor have the politicians, yet this week alone we find a journalist being stopped by counter-terrorism police at our borders under Section 7 of the Terrorism Act 2000, being deprived of the right of silence because she was distributing leaflets that were offensive to Muslims that said Allah is gay. That's not a racist leaflet. Yet we've got this going on in Telford, and I was ashamed at the lack of response and the drag, even in organisations such as the BBC, in reporting this.
Yes,
I was ashamed.
48 hours it took them.
We have to move on, but I'm sure this will come up again because it's such a terrible problem.